everyone. Looking forward to today's tidbit in this new world that we've been living in. I hope everybody's safe and cozy and that you've washed your hands today. Our Workplace Education Manitoba, I thought I'd start today just as a refresher. For any of you that are joining us that are new to WEM, we call ourselves WEM. It does stand for Workplace Education Manitoba. And our vision is to help people develop essential skills that are needed for work, learning, and life. And so often we have heard about, when we've gone to workplaces and connected with people through our West Center Workplace Essential Skills Training, how often they've commented that these skills that they've learned aren't just for the workplace, but also for home, for life, for interacting. Because the common thing we have, no matter what industry you're working in, is people. And so today we'll be exploring how to deal with some of those challenging situations. We do only have 30 minutes, right? So I'm sure there'll be a lot of challenging situations we won't quite get to today. There's a lot on this topic. We've taken from a 3-hour course, so we've really condensed it and just to bring you some of the highlights from our handling challenging situations in the workplace. So yeah, just that push to know that we're here to provide those essential skills. Today, the essential skills that we'll be focusing on would be working with others, continuous learning, obviously, but also oral communication. So welcome. The truth is, dysfunctional, destructive conflict happens. We see it a lot in different workplaces, and it has major negative outcomes, not just for ourselves, our teams, and our companies. I would also even say for a lot of us, for our sleep. Those 3 a.m. wake-ups like, oh my gosh, did I actually say that? Or did they actually say that to me? Or, why did they misunderstand? And a lot of times we look at conflict as a personality clash, or I just don't get along with this person. And the truth is, more often than not, it comes down to communication. We know that negative conflict is exactly that. It's negative, it's dysfunctional, and it's destructive. And it can really break apart good teams. It can take a really great leadership team and blow it apart. And that's what we want to avoid. And it's not necessarily that avoiding the conflict is the answer. I would say, 11 times out of 10 that's not the answer. Perhaps there are times when we could respectfully walk away or respectfully disagree and see conflict in a different light. And so that's my personal hopes and dreams today, is that we'll be able to recognize the conflict that we have and then work towards resolving it. I want you to consider just for a moment, what are some of the causes of conflict in your workplace? And often we are looking at conflict and we are focusing on the symptoms and not actually getting to the root cause of conflict. So that's something that we'll tackle today as well. When you consider some of the causes of conflict in your workplace, maybe some of these things come to mind, right? This idea of symptoms versus causes. So some of the causes of destructive conflict that we see, you'll notice that the first one isn't people, right? It's inconsistent policies or procedures. Or, I'd add to that, sometimes the policies and procedures are in place, but maybe they're not followed, or they're forgotten, or they're only for a certain set of people. And so when we have an inconsistent message, it can cause a lot of conflict. Think about a store that returns, let's say my brother went to the store, bought something and returned it and they took it back, no problem. I do the same thing and they say, well, we don't take that back. But meanwhile, my brother was able to take it back. Jim is always lucky. I'm just joking. Could turn it into something totally different. But if we don't have that consistent message to our customers, to our internal as well as external customers, to our vendors, we're also going to infuse some mistrust. So that's why that number 1 there, inconsistent policies and procedures. These are causes of destructive conflict. Number 2 here, lack of needed resources. Well, hello, I think the toilet paper, anybody? Some of the needed resources that we see in a workplace, the number one that comes to me is time, right? Often we're asked to do things with little or no time to do it, and maybe sufficiently or in a way that we would deem as, our best effort. Time and money are so tied together, aren't they? It seems that we are always in lack of one or both of them, as well as people, which money could tie into people as well, right? If we don't have the resources financially to support the work we have through our human resources, our actual people or team members, that's also going to cause a lot of conflict. We see in that case, not only conflict, but we see people who are overworked, overstressed, which eventually that also causes conflict. And if we're not seeing it in the workplace, I bet you $5 that you're seeing it in their home life with their friends. So those resources are, can also be a cause of conflict. A lack of essential training. Some folks don't even know what their jobs are. What if they don't even have a piece of paper that tells them what their job description is? And so those essential training, some of those basic things, some of our folks that we work with, they don't have a lot of time. We go back to number 2, resources, to provide the training. Maybe they're working in a fast-paced industry where they just need a body, and then mistakes are made. And then look at that, we're looping back to number 1, inconsistent policies and procedures because they don't know what they are, right? Tricky. So those essential training, resources, policies, and procedures. We said time crunch pressures as well. We mentioned that under resources. And here's another one, different personal values and personalities. So you'll notice that it is on the list. It's just not on the top of the list. And it's often seen as something that's, the most important. Like I said earlier, I just don't get along with them, or we're just too different. I would venture to say that it's not that there's probably something else that you're dealing with in the workplace, and that this idea of different personal values or personalities is actually masking what the true problem is. And it's tricky, right? Sometimes it's almost easier to label it as, well, I don't get along with so-and-so, so that's what the problem is, instead of doing the hard work, which is figuring out and getting to the root cause. And any of you that have done problem solving know that root cause takes effort and it takes time. And the same thing is true when we're dealing with interpersonal conflict. This circle is one of my favorite things in the world, especially when it comes to handling challenging situations. There's a fellow named Christopher Moore. He developed the circle of conflict, and it's essentially breaking down what we were just talking about, how a lot of our conflicts may be masked as relationship conflicts or as personality issues. But if we were to drill down even deeper, we could separate them into these different topics. So let's take a look at the green one, data conflict. This is usually a pretty juicy one. So a lack of information. I could literally go on about that for a good 15 minutes, about how lack of information could be seen in so many different ways, whether it's people withholding information, don't get me started, people not being, having confidence or feeling secure enough to be able to ask questions when they're unsure, when they're lacking information. And then there's a whole other section on not even knowing what to ask or not even knowing what information is lacking. And so you can see where data conflicts can get pretty juicy. So that first one, lack of information, misinformation, okay? So whether that's a misinterpretation of a message, not giving the right information, whether on purpose or not, I would hope to think that it wasn't done on purpose. Number 3, differing views on data relevance. Often in manufacturing, we see, this pull between production and maintenance, and how the differing views on that could cause conflict. That's not a departmental issue. That's not a personality problem. That is differing views on data relevance, where someone would say, maintenance would say, let's take a half day to shut everything down and maintain this machine, where production would say, we've got to produce because we've got to sell and we have customers waiting. And so you can see where both are right. And so that's number 3, differing views on data relevance, and then different interpretations, like I mentioned. If we go to the right of that, structural conflict, and by the way, as we're going through these, I want you to think about some of the conflicts that you've been faced with lately and see if you can figure out where they fit in. Structural conflicts, unequal authority, unequal control of resources, and time constraints. Again, that's not a personality issue, right? Those are structural conflicts. The orange one is value conflicts. This one can get kind of juicy, and yes, we're bringing it up. Different ways of life, ideology, worldview, and even different criteria for evaluating ideas. Lately, well, not so much lately, but a couple of weeks ago and before that, the theme for me in this year has been generational differences. And I'm not sure if some of you are faced with that in your workplaces or even with your families. But that has been a theme that has popped up time and time again on how the olders versus the youngers. And just as a spoiler alert, in one group we were able to figure out we want the same thing, which is respect. And we'll get to that in just a moment. But some of those can look like value conflicts when we're, okay Karen and okay boomering around. The truth is we may have different ways of life. We probably do have different ideology and even worldviews. Politics right now is off the charts and so polarizing. And I'm not even talking about our own country. We're so worked up with what's happening down south. I'm not even sure if we're aware of what's happening in our own backyard, but these are ones that can cause a lot of conflict in the workplace as well. And I'm sure there are other values. You think about the values that your company stands for. If you're in juxtaposition of those yourself, then that's going to be a value conflict. Maybe there's been a time in your life, maybe not right now, but in the past where you've been asked to do something that went against your own personal values and convictions. And it can be very, very conflicting. And so in our emotional intelligence workshop, we talk a little bit about that and understanding our own values so that we know when we make a decision and when we're acting in alignment with our own values. So again, that's another one, value conflict, that can be masked as a personality issue when really it's just a value conflict, right? So when we can break down our conflicts and to see what they actually are, it's almost like peeling back layers of an onion. We can see them for what they truly are. So let's go to the yellow one, interest conflicts, perceived or actual conflict over the interest. You can see that within workplaces, competition, procedural interest, even psychological interest. I almost think of, hidden agendas when it comes to this, or differing agendas. And then last but not least, yes, it is here, relationship conflict. So again, that can go to communication. So we have miscommunication. What about strong emotions? Depending the topic, it can get pretty fired up. Stereotyping is another one. And we could be here all day listing the ways that we stereotype people, right? Maybe it's, the city folk versus the country folk. It's different colors, diversity in culture, in gender. There's so many different ways that we stereotype, which causes relationship conflict. And then, of course, repetitive negative behavior, whether that's by a person individually or by a department, by a group, by a branch, whatever it is, right? So that in itself would go under relationship conflict. Google this, guys. This is on the interweb, Circle of Conflict, and it can really help you and your team to be able to break down what you're actually faced with in the workplace. Now, other causes of destructive conflict, unchecked assumptions and perception. Oftentimes, we're hopping in with our own truth without actually seeing things from another side, and that's what emotional intelligence can do. If that's something you're low in, this is a great time to research this stuff. Daniel Goleman, author of Emotional Intelligence, helps us to check our assumptions and our perceptions to make sure that they're based in fact and not just feeling, and that there's a mixture of both fact and feeling when we're working with people. The truth is, we could have boundary issues as well. Maybe we've got something going on, like we're working with relatives, with our neighbors. Maybe we have dysfunctional incentive practices. Or like I said earlier, a lack of job descriptions, right? So this can be really destructive and cause conflict when really, if we look at this, a lot of this is a lack of information. How conflict occurs: poor communication, number one. Juicy stuff like seeking power. I think that should be a new show. Tonight at 8, Seeking Power, right? Maybe we're dissatisfied with the management style. Maybe there's weak leadership, lack of openness, right? If we've got change issues as well. So there's a lot of reasons why conflict occurs, and we could be here all day listing all of our causes of conflict. It could be these other things, like we said, safety issues. Maybe people feel unsafe in the workplace. A lack of diversity. If everything's all the same, it's pretty hard to see things from a different light. Maybe we don't have a team culture, and maybe we have a lack of culture of respect. And all of these things can be very destructive, and we look at them as the root cause of destructive conflict. The truth is, destructive conflict reduces team efficiency. In our course on leading teams, we talk about the difference between teams and groups, and some of you have had the pleasure of doing that with. And what we find often is that most of us are working towards team behaviors, but we're infusing it with a few of these group behaviors where things aren't cohesive. We maybe have the same goal, but the way that we're getting there is dysfunctional. Negative conflict creates an environment of fear, frustration, distrust, and avoidance. This goes back to one of our very first points today, which is, do people feel confident enough to come to me with questions? Or are we living in a land of negative conflict that's creating this fear and frustration? Okay. What we'll see as a result is work scheduling issues, right? People aren't showing up for work, or they are showing up for work, but they're not really there, or they could just leave. And then our communication becomes even more dysfunctional, and it just spirals out of control. I've seen this in a workplace where there were some conflict between a manager and an employee, and the employee, both people were trying to figure this out, but because they were both so on guard, their communication just spiraled and just got worse and worse and worse, to the point where they're no longer communicating face-to-face and only through email. Anybody else going, oh my gosh, no. And thankfully they were able to, the good part of the story is that it's being worked out, but and they're no longer only communicating through email, because we know that the main way we interpret a message is through body language. So if we're only communicating through email, it's really hard to see that body language, and we end up infusing our own tone. That's a whole other thing, right? Let's look at this idea of presenteeism versus absenteeism. Presenteeism, if you haven't heard of this term before, it's people who are there physically. They've shown up for work, but they've checked out, right? They're no longer present in mind and heart. They're just going through the motions. Then we have folks that are just not showing up for work. Maybe they're not even calling in anymore. Maybe we have people starting to call in, or just, I'm not feeling well today, cough, cough. And, just they're not there. They're not there in body. Sometimes I wonder if absenteeism is better than presenteeism. I wonder if it would be better to have someone not be there than someone who is there physically, but not really there emotionally, mentally, right? Especially thinking of people that are either leading teams or are in the face of the public. So presenteeism is very dangerous, as is absenteeism. These are not causes of conflict. Okay, some of you have maybe thought that earlier, that having people not show up for work causes conflict. It does, for sure, but it's not the cause of conflict. Both of these, presenteeism and absenteeism, these are symptoms of a deeper issue. And one of those issues could be team, right? We have a lack of a cohesive team. So we know that destructive conflict reduces team efficiency. We see that through fractured team energy. Things become personal. I've heard people say, well, I'm not here to help so-and-so do their job. I'm here to get my job done. Okay, true, but if we can work as a team, then we can both get our jobs done better. We know that teams are more effective. The truth is the workplace environment becomes toxic. Some of you have walked into places probably. I know I have, and I'm thinking of maybe a store or something, right, where you can tell that the two people working there have just had a huge fight. You can feel it. So when we have this destructive conflict, the workplace environment does get toxic. Team loses credibility within the company, within the organization, as well as externally, like I said. And also the business is suffering overall. Production is reduced, and part of that has to do with trust, right? So we'll talk about that in just a second. The truth is, we are responsible for acting in a respectful and professional manner at all times. Respectful engagement, this is everyone's responsibility. And regardless of the actions of others, we have to be the big girl or the big boy, right? Hold ourselves accountable and maintain that baseline of respectful engagement, okay? The truth is, we can either gain respect or lose respect for them. And this is true for other people by what we're doing, right? We're either continuing to build that respect or it's being diminished. And no matter what, we are respectful. Others do not have to earn our respect. This is a really hot button for me. The word earn, there's something stinky about it for me. We give respect, period. Now, what may change is our level of trust with that person. We maintain our baseline of respectful engagement. We offer respect to everyone, and our actions should always be respectful. Like I said, what changes is perhaps our trust. How we can build that trust with people is to provide direction, supervision, guidance, to provide positive feedback that inspires confidence, providing corrective feedback that helps people to know when they're doing things wrong and how to fix it. And that's a whole other topic, right? Some of you have joined in on that before, where telling someone they did a crappy job, that's not corrective feedback. People need to be able to do something with the information that you've given them. And obviously here too, providing opportunities for training to ensure employee competence. And, saying something like, I've told them the same thing 5 times is not ensuring employee competence, right? We need to change the way that we're training if our people aren't getting it. That's an us problem, not a them problem. So let's look at a few communication engagement styles that we see in the workplace. So assertive is what we want, right? Direct, respectful. Passive avoids conflict, and some of us maybe live in that land, or we know people that do, and it can be a tricky land to live in. Aggressive, not appropriate, right? Verbally assaultive, disrespectful. The B word is even in here. And then number 4, passive aggressive. I find this style, I probably use it, but I find it the most difficult to deal with when I'm working with someone like that. That's being passive aggressive. It can be very challenging to get to what their real issue is because they're being passive and aggressive. So like we said, the number 1 best way is assertive. We're direct and respectful. It's a way of being able to state our opinion without infringing on the rights of others. It's respectful of ourselves and others. And it means that we're a direct and confident communicator. Watch your emails for this as well, that they're not too wordy or working around things that could show a bit of passive behavior when really we want assertive engagement. And try not to think, if you are a passive communicator, try not to think of assertive as aggressive. Aggressive is something totally different. Now, the happy news. Not all conflict is bad. right? Conflict can be constructive. It can be a creative process that enhances engagement and productivity. Often when we're faced with problems, it's how we handle it. And so taking a conflict and making it constructive can be one of the greatest things you can do with your team. So constructive conflict actually is desired and expected. I think of a few different teams I've worked with. It's not even a conflict, it's just problem solving. It's getting to, the root cause of things. It's understanding where other people are coming from and learning sometimes that your idea is great, but it's not the best for the situation, right? So team members may have differing opinions, what directions and what changes would be most beneficial. And when we collaborate together, magical things happen. Hopefully we'll be able to have a session on our different conflict response styles like collaboration, competitive, compromise, avoidance, right? And there's another one, it's slipping my mind, teddy bear, accommodating. Yeah, so to be accommodating. And recognizing what our default is when it comes to conflict will help us to be able to respond better. So anyway, that's a commercial for another session. The truth is, there's a lot of truths today, folks. The truth is, this type of conflict, when it's constructive, it forces us to look at a situation and see if there is a different way or a more innovative way of solving the problem. It encourages us to view things from a different light and hopefully to see things from another point of view. That's called empathy, right? So another part of our emotional intelligence is empathy. When we have empathy, we'll be great at this type of conflict, of seeing it in a positive light. It often is a result of several ideas producing a better solution. We see interest and energy increased within the team. People feel valued, they feel their voice has been heard, and they're most likely to become more dynamic and cohesive. So going back to our first thought here, some of us at the beginning may have been thinking about different causes of conflict. My invitation to you today is to look at that list in your mind, write out some of those causes of conflict that you're seeing and check in to make sure that they're not just symptoms. So when you have, people who aren't getting along, that could be a symptom of a deeper problem. Maybe it's inconsistent practice, right? Thinking back to that other list. I want to thank you all for joining us today. We're looking forward to offering you weekly tidbit trainings like this. So please stand by, check your inbox. We've sent out a list in our a newsletter. Sorry, we use a Constant Contact as a platform for that anyway. Our newsletter, and it has a list of all of our upcoming topics for the next month. So like I said, we're offering these to you weekly, Tuesdays at 10. Bring a friend virtually, not with you. Stay home. And if you have any comments or questions, please feel free to get in touch with us. You can reply to the email that you received from Rochelle. And yeah, we look forward to interacting with you and keeping up our training as much as we can during this stressful time. Take care, everyone.